What's up, Gator Country? Nick Torre for Richard Johnson, Dan Thompson. A special Google Hangouts version of GCTV today, kind of wrapping up the Toledo game before we turn our attention to Miami. We're going to talk about a few things today. First, each one of us will give you a stat that we think is interesting, and we're going to run through who were some of the top performers against Toledo. We'll segue into our stat section. Dan, if you want to start us off, what's one stat that you looked up that stood out to you as interesting?
I think what's important first before we go into the first stat is this Toledo team that we beat, or that Florida beat pretty handedly, is not just a pushover team that Florida is used to playing. They're not an Eastern Idaho State. They're going to be a team that probably wins the MAC this year. So all of the stats that you look at, you should take that into consideration, that you're not just talking about a normal first-team opponent that Florida plays. But I would say that time of possession was incredible. Florida held the ball for close to 40 minutes in the game, and that's something that if you hold the ball 39 minutes and 48 seconds for every game, you're likely going to come out victorious on all of those games. That's the second most time in the country for any team that played so far. So I think you have to look at that stat. And what about you, Nick?
Mine is that Toledo threw the ball on 18 of 23 first down attempts, and they only completed 7 of those passes. So that's now 11 plays where you are basically starting a drive on 2nd and 10. You're putting yourself in bad positions against a team that is more talented and deeper than you. I think that was interesting that Toledo chose to throw that much on first down, and then especially when you're only completing a tiny fraction of that. Credit to Florida's defensive line. Dominic Easley was all up in the backfield all game long. Ronald Powell, Jonathan Bullard, the entire front four had a great game, but also credit to the linebackers for playing the underneath routes well, and credit to the cornerbacks for sticking their men. I think that when you're playing a team that is deeper, probably a little more talented than you need to put yourself in some situations where you're going to be in 2nd and 3rd and short rather than 2nd and 10 and, okay, well, what do we do now so that we're not in 3rd and long, which kind of leads into Richard's stat.
Yeah, the Toledo Rockets were 1 for 13 on 3rd down yesterday, which isn't good just at face value. No. So that means Florida had 12 3rd down stops. On those 3rd down stops, Toledo averaged 10 yards needed to convert. It was 3rd and 10 on an average of all those 12 plays. The Rockets only had 2 3rd and manageables all game. One was a 3rd and 1. The other was a 3rd and 5. The strain of being that far away from the first down marker really shackles play calling and the diverse amount of plays that you can do. You really pretty much have to pass the ball every time. And that strain that it put on the offense was obvious. Senior quarterback Terrence Owens dropped back to pass on 10 of the 12 failed 3rd down attempts. He was sacked once and intercepted another time. The 2 times he actually completed a pass out of those 10 dropbacks, they were twice, and both connections only combined to gain 8 yards, 4 yards each time. Toledo wasn't great on 3rd down. They weren't even very good on 3rd down, and it's because they were in 3rd and long every time.
All right, now let's get into let's give 1 or 2 players that you were impressed with. We'd start with Richard.
You're
one from each side of the ball.
Yeah, on the defensive side, Near Ball is a type of guy that I was very impressed with. You didn't really see it much show up on the stat sheet. Ball, as I'm looking at our post-game notes, 3 total tackles, 2 assists, and a solo tackle. Did have a pass breakup in pass coverage. So it wasn't somebody that showed up a ton on the box score. But 2 specific plays stood out for me. Ball in pass coverage. He's an outside linebacker that moved to the inside, and the speed that he possesses, being an outside linebacker by trade, we talked about it in yesterday's GCTV, really makes him unique. And it's the type of guy that, because of that speed and recognition of passing routes and stuff like that, because of being used to covering on the outside, he brings that knowledge on the inside of Florida's second level. And you saw some guys got some underneath catches, and Ball was on top of it and completely erased yards after the catch. and that was not a thing for Toledo yesterday in near-on-balls island.
Okay, and then give me one on the offensive side of the ball.
Well, on the offensive side of the ball, it's got to be Mac Brown. It's a guy that
not even being creative.
Of course not. It's a guy that no one knew what to expect from Mac Brown. If you didn't have faith in Mac Brown based on prior performance, I can't sit here and fault you. 25 carries last season, 104 yards. Well, he did that yesterday. 25 carries, 114 yards. And he really quelled the doubts, silenced the doubts. Florida did what they wanted to do in the run game yesterday, which is do it in between the tackles. And it didn't, I understand it's Toledo, but there was no significant drop-off, that you saw running-wise from Mac Brown. There's some stuff in coverage and pass blocking that maybe you can clean up, but that's okay. It's the first game. All in all, Brown really impressed me yesterday.
And a quick question for Dan. Dan,
Yeah.
after it was announced that Matt Jones was going to miss the opener, I think a lot of Gator fans were like, well, what do we do now? We have a kid who was a former walk-on, 2 freshmen that the coaches say, still need to do a lot of things to be able to be counted on and trusted. And, a fourth-year junior who hasn't shown much since he's been here. Right. What did Matt Jones and some of the other guys, when they got in, do to kind of quell that and say, hey, listen, Florida is a lot deeper at running back than just Matt Jones?
Yeah, no, Mac Brown, the first thing is you have to give credit to the offensive line that opened up all the holes. You saw big holes being opened up for Mac Brown. You saw it for Mark Herndon, and you saw it for Kelvin Taylor when he came in late in the game. So you saw the offensive line perform exceptionally well, which is something that we've talked about that Florida can expect. You can expect to see a much better offensive line, which is not something that Florida's necessarily had the past couple of years. You saw great blocking, but ultimately, I've been high on Mac Brown. I know that he's struggled a little bit over the past couple of years, and maybe that has to do with pass protection. Maybe it doesn't. We don't really know the reason, but he had the opportunity to really show out this year, or this opportunity was his turn to earn playing time, and I think that he deserved it. But at the same time, you can look at what Mark Herndon did. He had a couple of runs, and then Kelvin Taylor obviously had a couple of big runs. I think Herndon and both Kelvin Taylor averaged more than 8 yards a carry, so that's great, but that's also indicative of great offensive line play too. So, Florida really has some great options at running back, which is something that they always have had the past couple of years at least, especially power running backs.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and we'll switch the questioning over to Dan. Dan, give me your one offensive player, one defensive player that stood out to you on Saturday.
All right, yeah, on defense, I think near on ball is a great example. I'm going to go with it's very easily to pick a couple of different players here, but I'm going to go with Cody Riggs. And so Cody Riggs is obviously a converted defensive back that turned into safety. He's added a lot of weight, played really well in coverage yesterday, had 6 tackles, covered well, when he was in coverage, but ultimately helped close down a good portion of the field when he was playing. So I think that Cody Riggs did an exceptional job for somebody that wasn't a safety 6 months ago. And then on the offensive side of the ball, I'm going to throw a curveball here, and I'm going to say Trey Burton was the offensive player that I really saw a lot of good things out of. So I know that I've been not the world's biggest Trey Burton fan in the way that he's been used the past couple of years, and I still wasn't a fan of the way that they used him in the Wildcat. But as a slot receiver, caught 5 balls, 69 yards, had a couple of really good solid routes where they were crisp, and then he went out of his way to make some spectacular catches and then get yardage after the carry, which is not after the catch, which is not something that he's always done. So I think that that Trey Burton was probably my offensive player of the game, outside of Mac Brown, who obviously played really well.
Right.
What about you?
Quick note: the Cody Riggs, that he had 6 tackles. That led the team.
Yeah.
With that total. Going into my guys on defense, his stats weren't great, but I'm going to go with Ronald Powell. It's been over 600 days since Ronald Powell had played in the swamp after going through 2 ACL surgeries. To come out, gets a sack on the first drive of the game. That was his only tackle. He did have 3 quarterback hurries, but Powell was putting pressure on the quarterback. He may not have gotten to the quarterback, but his play was affecting what Toledo could do on offense as well as easily and the rest of the line. But we're pointing out Ronald Powell, first game back, played very well, played fast. On offense, I really want to point out Gideon Agave. A lot of times you see him whiffing on blocks, but for every whiff he had, there was a punishing block. He's new to the position. It was his first time playing fullback, I think ever, definitely first time at Florida. I think this is a move that's really rejuvenated his career at Florida. When the move was first made, I think the initial reaction was, okay, well, they just don't want Hunter Joy to get dinged up during camp. It's way more than that. Ajabe, we didn't see Levetter yesterday, but Gideon, there is definitely more to the move than just to add depth to that position in practice. He's going to play. He got the start yesterday, caught a little pass from Jeff Driscoll, scored his first ever touchdown. That's a moment that he's never going to forget. So while there are things that he needs to learn as far as technique and picking up blockers, he did very well for his first time playing on offense and playing that position. All right, well, that's going to wrap up our Google Hangout today. For Dan, Richard, and myself, we appreciate you coming out and watching. Make sure to check out GatorCountry.com and our new Gator Country magazine if you haven't yet. You stay classy, Gator Nation.